Welcome back, everybody, to another week of Sunday School here at the Lighthouse Church of the Nazarene in Moravia, Iowa, where we're going through the book of Ezra. This week, we're in Ezra chapter 4. Now, what's been going on right now is what we refer to as the post-exilic period. If you remember, the Babylonians came against the two southern tribes of Judah and took them into captivity. That happened in about 586 BC. Well, so the Jews were then over in Babylon for 70 years, as the prophet Jeremiah prophesied that they would be in captivity for 70 years. Well, the 70 years is now up, and King Cyrus has made a decree that the Jews can now go back to Jerusalem, rebuild the temple, and populate the area. The really interesting thing is that the prophet Isaiah actually mentioned King Cyrus by name 150 years before he was ever born, saying that he would be the one that would say that they could go back and rebuild the temple. So everything's going great for the people. They're on a spiritual high. As we left off last week, they were rejoicing because they rebuilt the foundation of the temple. You know, they have a letter from King Cyrus saying, hey, we have permission now to rebuild this temple. So probably many of these people had never felt closer to God than they were right now. But you notice what the interesting thing is? Right then is when Satan always chooses to attack us. So they just laid the foundation. When we left off in chapter 3, the people were rejoicing and singing because they laid the foundation of the temple. You know, if you remember the old people, they were actually crying. They had tears of sorrow because they remembered how great Solomon's temple was. But the young guys, they were rejoicing because they were rebuilding the temple and they were back in their land. So this week we're in Ezra chapter 4. Let's get out our Bibles and let's follow along. Ezra chapter 4, verse 1. Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the descendants of the captivity were building the temple of God of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel. I'm just going to stop there. The adversaries of these people. Come on, can't we just serve God without having adversaries? Well, no, we cannot. 1 Peter 5:8 says, be sober, be vigilant, for your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. As long as you try to live for God, the enemy will not leave you alone. That's just the truth right there. We should live our lives as to give the devil a good reason to hate us. You and I, hopefully we're on the devil's radar. From this point on, clear to the end of Nehemiah when they're rebuilding the walls, there will always be conflict. Nothing attempted for God is going to go unchallenged, and that's what we see right here. So the adversaries, who are these people? These are what's known as the Samaritans. If you remember when the Assyrians came in 722 BC and overtook the northern 10 tribes of Israel, what the Assyrians did is they left the poorest of the land and then they brought foreigners in to repopulate. Well, these foreigners and the poorest of the land, they would have intermarried and we would have what's known as the half-breed Jews or the Samaritans. Now, the interesting thing is the Jews and the Samaritans did not get along one bit. If you remember in John chapter 4, the woman at the well, Jesus says, hey, could you get me a drink of water? And she's like, how is it that you being a Jew ask for a drink from me, a Samaritan woman? I mean, that just never happens. If you remember the Pharisees, when they were mocking Jesus and when they were mad at Jesus, they say, do we not say rightly that you are a Samaritan and have a demon? Well, they knew he wasn't a Samaritan, but they kind of just went hand in hand, being a Samaritan and being demon-possessed. So the Samaritans, they were what we would call the half-breeds from the foreigners and the poorest of the land, them intermarrying. They say they want to help rebuild. So the people inhabiting the land right now, they're not happy that the Jews are now coming back. So let's see what happens. Verse 2. So they came to Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses and said, let us build with you, for we seek your God as you do, and we have sacrificed to him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here. So they want to help and partner with them. You know, just on the surface, we're like, oh, that sounds great. The more the merrier, right? Many hands make light work. But that's not the case right here. For one instance, they say, we seek God as you do. That's actually not the case. If we go back to 2 Kings 17, 2 Kings chapter 17, it says that, remember when they came in and then lions were attacking and they're like, hey, we aren't serving the right God in this land. So they actually sent priests to help them out. And it's 2 Kings 17:33. It says, they feared the Lord, yet they served their own gods. You know, they served many gods is the way that these Samaritans do. So when they say, oh, we serve God just as you do, no, they didn't. The funny thing is, or it's not really funny, they probably thought they were right. They probably thought that they were sincere, and just as one of these right here. So verse 3. So the Samaritans come, they say, hey, we want to help you rebuild the temple. We serve God just as you do. Let us help you. Verse 3. But Zerubbabel and Joshua and the rest of the heads of the fathers' houses of Israel said to them, you may do nothing with us to build a house for our God, but we alone will build to the Lord God of Israel as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us. So what is Zerubbabel's answer to them? Absolutely not. We're not taking your help. Let's think about this through. What do you think would have been their motives? Now, it said right at the beginning that they were their adversaries, that they weren't friends. So maybe they were planning on sabotaging the construction of the temple. That could be the case. I think what's actually is more is the case here is they probably would have wanted to influence. If they were helping it, they could have said, well, let's have these other gods that we can serve over in this corner. So what does Zerubbabel and the men say? Absolutely not. This kind of gives us a peek into Satan's strategy. You know what Satan's strategy is? If you can't beat them, join them. You know, persecution never works for Satan. You know what always happens under persecution? The church grows. The Church of Jesus Christ spreads. John MacArthur, in one of his studies, actually said that he is praying for persecution to come to America. Because do you know what persecution does? It separates the wheat from the chaff, and it shows people and it shows everyone who is the sincere followers of Jesus Christ right here. So, persecution never works. You know what does? If you can't beat them, join them. So that's what they're trying to do right here. So, let's go to verse 4. So then the people of the land tried to discourage the people of Judah, and they troubled them in building, and they hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So the people say no. This would have been a huge step of faith, actually, to say, no, we don't need your help. Because it would have been tempting to say, well, we need all the help we can get, you know. But they say, no, we're not taking your help right now. One thing we need to remember, we can go with this verse right here and say like, well, let's see, the church just needs to separate themselves from the world. But separation must never become isolation where we make ourselves of no effect on the world. We have to be in the world, but not of the world. So what do the Samaritans do? Well, they hire counselors and actually try to trouble them. You know, they pay people to give bad advice. You know, these hired counselors were probably like, let's wait for better weather before you keep going on this. Or, you know, maybe this site's a little faulty. Maybe there's a better building site over here. It also says they troubled them, probably legally. You know, like nowadays they'd bring OSHA in or something, say, oh, this isn't safe. We have to shut this down. So the Samaritans, after the Jews wouldn't help them, they then now tried to sabotage it and get in their way. Verse 6, in the reign of Azarias, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. Now, in the days of Artaxerxes, now we've actually had 4 kings mentioned here just from verse 5 to 7. We've had Cyrus and Darius and Azarias and Artaxerxes. You know, when we get to the book of Esther, these names will come up again. So verse 7, in the days of Artaxerxes also, Bishlam, Mahidroth, Tabal, and the rest of their companions wrote to Artaxerxes, king of Persia. And the letter was written in Aramaic script and translated into the Aramaic language. Raham the commander and Shimshai the scribe wrote a letter against Jerusalem to King Artaxerxes in this fashion. Verse 9, from Raham the commander, Shimshai the scribe, and the rest of their companions, representatives of the Dianites, the Aphorites, the Tarpolites, the people of Persia and Erech and Babylon and Shushan and the Hivites and Elamites, and the rest of the nations whom the great and noble Osnappar took captive and settled in the cities of Samaria and the remainder beyond the river and so forth. That's quite an introduction right there, isn't it? Verse 11, this is a copy of the letter that they sent him. So what do the people do? They're trying to sabotage the place. They won't let them join. So what are they going to do? They're going to write a letter. They're going to tell the king what's going on. So verse 11. To King Artaxerxes from your servants, the men of the region beyond the river and so forth. Verse 12. Let it be known to the king that the Jews, this is the first time they're actually referred to as Jews. And from here on out, this is kind of what they're referred to as. Let it be known to the king that the Jews who came up from you have come to us at Jerusalem and are building the rebellious and evil city and are finishing its walls and repairing its foundations. Verse 13, Let it now be known to the king that if this city is built and the walls completed, they will not pay tax, tribute, or custom, and the king's treasury will be diminished. How do you get a politician's attention right there? Talk about taxes and revenue. Say, king, these people aren't going to be paying their taxes and you're going to be short on revenue. That's how you get the king's attention right there. Verse 14. Now because we received support from the palace, it was not proper for us to see the king's dishonor. Therefore, we have sent and informed the king. Now, what are they talking about? They're talking about the king's honor right here. Do the people really care about the king's honor and revenue? Of course they don't. This is all made up fictitious stuff that they're sending to the king. You know, there's a saying that there's always two reasons for doing something. The stated reason and the real reason. You know, what's their stated reason? Oh, king, we're worried about your honor and your revenue. What's the real reason? It's because they hate the Jews and what they're doing in the land right here. So, verse 15, that the search may be made in the books of your records of the fathers, and you will find in the books of the records, and know that this city is a rebellious city, harmful to kings and provinces, and that they have incited sedition within the city in former times, for which cause this city was destroyed. We inform the king that if this city is rebuilt and its walls are completed, the result will be that you will have no dominion beyond the river. So what do? They also resort to flattery here, don't they? They say like, oh, king, you're so great. We're just worried about you. The king should have saw right through this, but he didn't. You know, another interesting thing right here. Hatred against God's kingdom can sometimes be hidden in loyalty to the government. If you remember in the times of Jesus, it's in John chapter 19, they said, shall I crucify your king? And they said, no, we have no king but Caesar. They feigned loyalty to the government to try to get Jesus. These people are doing the same thing. And we see the same thing today. People are like, oh, we don't care. Let religion do what they want. But there's a separation of church and state. Like they really care. What else can we take away from this lesson right here? This is another good one I always think about. Sinful people do not play fair, do they? They play by different rules than we as Christians do. Sometimes are we as Christians at a competitive disadvantage because we don't cheat, lie, and steal and take bribes? Well, Proverbs 13:11 says wealth gained by dishonesty will be diminished. I think take the high road and it's always the right road. Verse 17, so the king is now going to answer them. Verse 17, so the king sent an answer to Rahum the commander, to Shimshai the scribe, to the rest of their companions who dwell in Samaria, and to the remainder beyond the river. Peace and so forth. The letter which you sent to us has been clearly read before me. And I gave the command, and a search has been made, and it was found that this city in former times has revolted against kings, and rebellion and sedition have been fostered in it. There have also been mighty kings over Jerusalem who have ruled over all the region beyond the river, and tax, tribute, and custom were paid to them. Verse 21, now give the command to make these men cease, that this city may not be built until the command is given to me. Now, first of all, why did the king listen to him? Probably because, they stated their case first, and he didn't even take time to hear the other person's case. The king's only worried about his empire. He's not worried about learning about the truth here, is he? So, verse 23. Now, when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letter was read before Rahum, Shimshai the scribe, and their companions, they went up in haste to Jerusalem against the Jews, and by force of arms made them cease. Thus the work of the house of God, which is at Jerusalem, ceased, and it was discontinued until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. All right, so just to recap the chapter, they're starting to build the temple. The Samaritans say, hey, we want to come help you out. We serve God as you do. Zerubbabel said, no way, we're not taking your help. They then write a letter to the king over in Babylon and say, hey, these people are rebellious people. You don't want them building a city. The king answers them and says, yep, you're right. So now they come back with a letter from the king and say, guess what? You can't build the temple anymore. So the building project's now ceased. It's actually going to be set back 18 years. 18 years this is going to sit idle. Now we actually learned from the prophet Haggai that during this time, the people only focused on their own interests and neglected the house of God. So their hands are tied. It's now against the law to serve God. How do you think that's going to turn out? Well, we'll see next week in chapter 5. One other thought here, and we'll end for this week. How should we respond in times of adversity, just like these people have? The Christian life will not be easy. There will be trials. There will be adversity. But Proverbs 24:10 says, if you faint in the days of adversity, your strength is small. So It's now against the law to serve God. Let's see how they respond next week. That's Ezra chapter 4. Hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you the same time, same place next week. Bye.